While my cousins were clinking champagne glasses after inheriting millions, I was holding a wrinkled envelope with a one-way ticket to Alaska. They laughed, but inside that envelope were 6 handwritten words. Make them wish they never laughed. My name is Elliot Foster, and what happened next didn't just destroy their empire, it rewrote our family's legacy. The sun was already low when I pulled into the circular driveway of the Blake estate in Marin County. The house loomed at the top of the hill just as cold and proud as I remembered it. I hadn't been here in over a decade, not since Dad's funeral. Now it was Grandpa Harrison's turn. I stepped out of my car, adjusted my tie, and walked toward the front door. My mother, Margaret, waited near the entrance. Her face was drawn but calm. She gave me a small nod, the kind that carried more weight than 1,000 words. I returned it and walked past the threshold into a world I had tried to forget. The drawing room was packed, velvet armchairs, antique wood champagne flutes clinking in the background. Caleb stood near the fireplace, one hand tucked into the pocket of his tailored blazer. Vanessa sat beside him, all pearls and polished nails, smiling like she owned the world. Their children, Liam and Isabel, lounged by the piano, eyes glued to their phones. No one looked surprised to see me, just mildly amused. Liam glanced up, smirked, then leaned over to whisper something to Isabel. She giggled and flicked her hair over her shoulder. I found a quiet corner and waited. The lawyer, Mr. Monroe, entered promptly at 4. He was tall and bony, with the kind of voice that made every word sound like a verdict. We all took our seats. Caleb took the prime spot beside the lawyer, legs crossed, fingers steepled. Vanessa placed a hand on his knee like a silent trophy. Mr. Monroe cleared his throat. As per the last will and testament of Harrison Blake, he began, I will proceed with the reading of his final distribution of estate assets. The room fell into a heavy silence. I glanced at my mother. She sat straight, hands folded on her lap, face unreadable. To my grandson, Liam Blake, I leave $2 million and the beachfront property in Santa Barbara. Liam gave a little celebratory nod. Isabel whispered congratulations. To my granddaughter, Isabel Blake, I leave $1 million and the condo in downtown Seattle. To my daughter Vanessa and son-in-law Caleb, I leave full ownership of the Blake estate, the family trust, and a controlling interest in Blake Logistics Group. I felt the shift in the room. Satisfaction. Smugness. Caleb's mouth curled into something that was neither a smile nor a smirk. Just victory. Mr. Monroe paused, and to my grandson, Elliot Foster, he said, there it was, my name landing like a stone. Mr. Monroe reached into his briefcase and pulled out a plain white envelope. He handed it to me. This is yours. I held the envelope, felt its weight. It wasn't heavy. No keys, no checks, no thick stack of documents. Just paper. Liam chuckled. Isabel didn't even bother to hide her laughter. That's it? Vanessa asked, eyebrows raised. Mr. Monroe didn't respond. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, dated for the following morning. Beneath the ticket, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. Make them wish they never laughed. I stared at the words for a long time. My pulse slowed. The room around me seemed to fade, their laughter muffled behind a wall of quiet fury. I looked up. Caleb was watching me. So was Vanessa. Neither of them looked amused anymore. My mother reached over and placed a hand on mine. Just a touch. I slid the envelope into my jacket, stood up, and walked out of the room without a word. The air outside was cooler now, the sky turning gold. I walked to my car, heart steady. Whatever Grandpa had planned, it started tomorrow, and I was ready. The drive back to my apartment in Portland was quiet. No music, no talk radio, just the sound of tires humming along the interstate and the occasional whisper of wind through the crack in my window. Somewhere along the drive, as the sun dipped below the pine-covered hills, the memories started pulling at me again. I was 8 the first time I realized I didn't quite belong in the Blake family. It was a Christmas gathering, and Caleb had gotten a new bike, shiny and red with chrome handlebars. I had gotten a sweater. My mother smiled and thanked everyone, pretending not to notice. But I saw it. I saw everything even then. My father, Richard, tried to buffer it all. He was a lawyer for Blake Logistics back when the company was still expanding across the West Coast. Everyone respected him, at least on the surface. He was brilliant, disciplined, the kind of man who could make a judge pause with just a few words. But he wasn't blood, not Blake blood, and that mattered more than anything in that house. When I turned 16, I was set to apply for the Blake Family Scholarship, something Grandpa Harrison had created for his grandchildren. I was top of my class, captain of the debate team, the obvious candidate. Caleb's son Liam, 2 years younger, had no interest in academics but had the last name that mattered. 1 week before the selection, rumors spread that I had cheated on my PSATs. The accusation was baseless and never proven, but it was enough. I lost the scholarship. Liam got it the following year, even though he barely made the GPA cutoff. I never confronted him. I didn't need to. He wore his guilt like cologne, strong and obnoxious. Dad resigned from the company not long after. Officially, it was to focus on private practice, but I heard him and Mom arguing late one night, voices low and sharp, something about financial irregularities, Caleb shifting liabilities into Dad's name without permission. The word scapegoat was used. A few months later, Dad collapsed in his office. Heart attack. He was 52. That was the last time I set foot in the Blake estate until today. I remember standing at Dad's funeral, numb, watching Caleb deliver a eulogy like he wasn't the reason Dad was dead. Vanessa wore black Chanel and wept behind oversized sunglasses. Even then, she couldn't bring herself to speak to my mother. After that, I stopped attending family events. Weddings, birthdays, anniversaries. All of it faded into the background noise of my life. I moved with Mom to a modest house outside Eugene, Oregon. Took a job teaching high school literature. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, honest. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Still, Grandpa Harrison kept in touch. Once a year, like clockwork, a handwritten letter would arrive. He never said much, just a few lines about chess strategies, classic books he thought I should revisit, subtle things. But I knew what he meant. He saw it, all of it. I pulled into the parking lot of my building and sat in the car for a while, letting the engine tick itself to sleep. The plane ticket was still in my coat pocket. Alaska, a one-way trip. I hadn't told Mom yet. I wasn't sure how she'd take it or if I was ready to explain it. Inside, the apartment smelled like old books and cinnamon tea. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table flipping through a magazine, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up when I walked in. "Did they treat you like a stranger or like a ghost?" she asked without sarcasm. I gave a half smile and dropped the envelope on the table. She opened it, read the note, then looked at me. "That sounds like him," she said finally. "Did he say anything else?" "No, just this." She folded the paper carefully like it was something sacred, then slid it back into the envelope. "You know he never stopped believing in you, even when everyone else did their best to erase you." I nodded. I wanted to say more, but there was nothing left to explain. We both knew the story already. It had played on repeat for years. That night I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the radiator click and hum. I thought about Dad, about how he used to teach me to play chess on the porch when I was 12. He always said revenge was a poor strategy, but justice, real justice, required patience. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I packed light, just one bag, a change of clothes, my passport, a notebook in the envelope. Mom stood by the door, arms crossed, not crying, not smiling either. "Call me when you land, and Elliot, be careful." I leaned in, kissed her on the forehead, and walked out. The cab ride to the airport was uneventful. I watched the streets roll by, coffee shops opening, people jogging along the riverwalk, oblivious to the small war beginning inside me. At the gate, I sat near the window, staring out at the runway. Anchorage wasn't a place I had ever planned to visit, too cold, too remote. But if Grandpa had sent me there, it wasn't random. As I boarded, I felt the envelope shift in my jacket. The paper crinkled softly like a whisper. "Make them wish they never laughed." The words repeated in my mind as the plane rose through the clouds. Somewhere behind me, the Blake family was likely toasting their good fortune, unaware that the game had just begun. They had spent years pretending I didn't matter. But Grandpa had moved the first piece. It was my turn now. The plane landed in Anchorage just before noon. Snow lined the edges of the tarmac, not thick but stubborn, like it had no plans to leave anytime soon. I stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal. My bag slung over one shoulder. Coat zipped up to my chin. The air smelled sharp, cleaner than anything back home, like it hadn't been filtered through 1,000 exhaust pipes. I followed the crowd toward the exit, scanning for some kind of sign or name card. I hadn't arranged a pickup, hadn't called ahead. I wasn't sure what I expected, but as I reached the sliding doors, I saw her. A woman in her early 60s, tall and lean, stood just outside holding a small placard with one word written in careful cursive. Foster. Her coat was wool dark green, buttoned high against the cold. Her face was angular, lined with time, but her eyes were sharp as flint. When I approached, she gave a quick nod. "Mr. Foster," she said. "I'm Ruth Park." I hadn't expected anyone. Not really. But something about her tone made it feel like this had been in place for years. She led me to a black SUV, clean but unflashy. We didn't talk much on the drive. She kept her eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel, posture perfect. I watched the scenery blur past. Anchorage gave way to long stretches of pine and icy blue sky. The silence between us was not awkward, just efficient. After about an hour, we turned down a narrow gravel road that wound through the forest. Eventually, a small cabin came into view. It sat nestled between two tall spruce trees, its roof pitched steep against snowfall, windows shuttered, but intact. The kind of place built for long winters and longer silences. She parked beside the cabin and turned to face me. "Your grandfather prepared this place himself. He used to come up here during the off-seasons. Said it helped him think." She handed me a single key on a leather strap. "Inside you'll find what he left for you. Take your time." I stepped out of the SUV. She didn't follow. She simply nodded again and drove off, the sound of gravel crunching under tires fading quickly into the cold air. The cabin creaked when I pushed the door open. It smelled of cedar and old books, a faint trace of tobacco lingering near the stone fireplace. A thick rug covered the wooden floor. Everything was clean but not staged. This wasn't a guest house. It had been lived in, used with purpose. A small fire had already been laid in the hearth, unlit. I crouched beside it and sparked the kindling. The flames took quickly, casting a warm glow over the space. On the far side of the room stood a heavy desk. On it, a sealed envelope sat beneath a brass key. Next to it, a locked black box, square and heavy like a miniature safe. I opened the envelope first. If you are reading this, it means you chose to listen, not react. That alone means more than you know. Inside the envelope was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, clean and deliberate. No hesitation in the strokes. Elliot, our family forgot what it meant to build something with integrity. I built Blake Logistics from the ground up, but I saw early the rot creeping in. I tried to correct it. I failed. Caleb and Vanessa were never supposed to inherit it, but to prevent them from destroying it before you were ready, I had to let them believe they would. This cabin, this key, and this box contain everything you need to change that, but only if you are willing to carry it with clarity, not anger. Inside the box are documents, the real will, financial records, a map of every step they took to bury what I built. You may walk away from all of it, but if you stay, understand this. You will not be alone. Ruth will guide you. The board has been watching. They need proof. You will provide it. Do not become them, even when it's tempting. Harrison. My hands shook a little when I put the letter down. I picked up the brass key and turned it in the lock on the box. Inside were neatly stacked folders labeled in his handwriting. One read Original Last Will and Testament. Another Offshore Accounts. There were spreadsheets, printed emails, photographs, receipts, flight logs, a flash drive taped to the inside lid. I sat back in the desk chair staring at the contents. He had been preparing this for years. Every lie Caleb had told, every dollar siphoned, every backroom deal cataloged and organized. It was all here. And now it was mine. The door creaked behind me. I turned sharply. Ruth stood in the frame holding a thermos and 2 mugs. I figured you'd need something warm. Tea, I nodded and took the mug she handed me. He left instructions. Said if you came here and opened that box, I was to assist in any way I could. I'm not just a driver, Elliot. I used to work in compliance law. Your grandfather brought me in after he found out about the Cayman funnel. You knew. She nodded once. I helped him set up the firewall, the trust clause, the shadow will. He couldn't act without exposing you, but he made sure the structure would hold until you were ready. I sipped the tea. It was hot, spiced with clove and something sweet. Why me? I asked, voice low. Because you're the only one who didn't take anything. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fire crackle. Outside, snow had started to fall. Just a few flakes at first, light as ash, but steady. In that moment, I understood what the next few months would cost me. The weight of it settled into my chest, heavy but clear. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about reclamation. Snow drifted against the cabin windows, soft flakes melting as they touched the glass. I sat at the desk, folders spread open like a crime scene, waiting for the detective. My grandfather's handwriting guided me from one piece of evidence to the next. Offshore transfers routed through shell corporations in Panama and the Cayman Islands. Accounts opened under the names of retired employees who would never know they had been used. Memos signed by Caleb, Vanessa's approval initials scribbled in the margins. It was all here, not conjecture, but proof. I ran my fingers over the papers, feeling the grooves left by pen strokes. Each number, each signature was a nail in the coffin of their empire. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt like staring at a wound you thought had healed only to find it raw again. I leaned back and closed my eyes. 17. The year everything shifted. The memory came uninvited but vivid, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I was sitting outside the counselor's office at Northgate High, my acceptance essays stacked neatly in a folder on my lap. Liam stood down the hall, grinning at a group of seniors spinning a basketball on his finger. The counselor opened the door and motioned me inside. Her expression was polite but distant. There's been an allegation, she said without meeting my eyes. Cheating on the PSATs. We have to investigate. I remember my throat going dry. I had never cheated in my life. She explained there were discrepancies between my practice scores and my test results, that an anonymous tip had raised concerns. I knew exactly who had made the tip, but I had no proof. Liam walked by the window while she spoke, gave a small two-fingered salute, and kept walking. 2 weeks later, my scholarship application was denied. The committee said it was too risky. The story stuck even without evidence. Liam got the award the following year, praised for his perseverance despite his modest grades. That night, Dad came home late. He tried to console me, said the truth would win out eventually. But I heard him on the phone later, voice tense, telling someone from Blake Logistics that he wouldn't sign off on something unethical. That was the first time I heard Caleb's name hissed like a curse. Now, years later, the papers in front of me told the rest of the story. Caleb had been siphoning funds since the early 2000s, hiding liabilities in Dad's department, framing him as negligent when numbers didn't add up. When Dad resigned, Caleb promoted himself as the savior who cleaned up the mess. I saw the press release in one of the folders dated 3 weeks before Dad's heart attack. I pushed the papers away and stood up. The cabin was warm from the fire, but I felt cold. I walked to the window and watched the trees sway under a gentle wind. The snow was thicker now, blurring the horizon. My reflection in the glass looked older than 38, older than my father when he died. A soft knock on the door pulled me back. Ruth stepped in carrying a small notebook. "You've seen enough to know why he brought you here," she said quietly. I nodded. My voice didn't work for a moment. "He left you the tools, but not the plan. That's for you to decide." I turned back to the desk. "He kept records of everything. Offshore transfers, fake accounts, even the press release about Dad." "He knew." Ruth set the notebook down. "He knew. But he wanted you to know too. He wanted you to see it before you acted. He was afraid that anger would eat you alive if you didn't understand the full picture." I sat down again, staring at the letters and numbers that had defined my family's betrayal. My hands were steady now. The rage was still there, but it was shaped like a blade honed to a fine edge. "What would you do in my place?" I asked her. She thought for a long time before answering. "The law can do a lot if you give it the right leverage, but you have to decide if you're willing to stand in the light when it happens." I closed the folder labeled offshore accounts and slid it back into the box. One by one, I stacked the papers until the desk was clear again. The fire snapped behind me, throwing sparks up the chimney. I walked to the small kitchen and poured water into the kettle. Ruth moved to the door, her hand on the frame. "I'll be back tomorrow with more files. Take tonight to decide how you want to proceed." She left the door clicking softly shut behind her. The kettle hissed as it heated a slow rising whistle. I stood there listening, feeling the weight of the box like a presence in the room. I thought of Dad again, teaching me chess on the porch during summer nights. He always said a good player never moves out of anger. You wait. You see the whole board. Then you strike once and it's over. I carried the mug back to the desk and sat down. The box sat open, its contents neat and damning. I reached for the flash drive taped to the lid and slipped it into my laptop. A directory appeared instantly, folders named with dates and codes. Years of transactions. Decades of deceit. The screen glowed in the dim cabin light. My reflection looked back at me from the glass eyes, dark but clear. For the first time since the reading of the will, I felt a sense of direction, not just reaction. I began to make notes, lines of connection between shell companies, names of intermediaries, dates of transfers. Each note was a move on the board, each connection a strategy forming in slants. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the fire burned steady, the only sound the scratch of my pen across paper. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about precision. I picked up the phone the next morning as the cabin filled with salt winter light. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory dialing a number I hadn't used in nearly 2 years. On the third ring, I heard a familiar voice. "Elliot, I didn't expect you to call before the holidays." Noah Green had been my roommate in college, then my best man at the wedding that never happened. Now he was a senior investigator at a boutique law firm in Chicago, the kind that specialized in making powerful people uncomfortable. "I need your help," I said simply. "You sound serious. It's not a favor, it's war." That got his attention. There was a brief pause. "Tell me everything." I laid it out clean. Grandpa's hidden will, the offshore accounts, the fake corporations, the years of Caleb's manipulation, the setup that framed my father. I didn't hold back. Noah listened, didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the line was quiet. "You still have the documents, all of them. Originals, scanned copies, a flash drive, and your grandfather was smart enough to timestamp everything. He dated everything. Even annotated some of the accounts." Damn, that's rare. Most whistleblower cases I get, it's one email and a dream. I leaned back, watching the fire from the corner of my eye. "You still know how to trace shell corporations better than ever. I've done 3 internal investigations this year alone. One with a subsidiary tied to a shipping magnate in Houston. These people always think layers of distance make them invisible. They forget lawyers know how to dig." I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders beginning to shift. "So you'll help me?" Noah didn't hesitate. "Send me everything. Use the secure folder I'm about to email you. I'll pull in a financial forensic guy I trust, quiet, fast, doesn't ask dumb questions. We'll start mapping the paper trail." "What about legality? If your grandfather wrote that trust properly and you're the rightful heir to those documents, you're not leaking. You're defending your stake." Ruth walked into the room as I hung up. She raised an eyebrow. I nodded. "We have a team now." I spent the next 2 hours scanning everything that hadn't already been digitized. I labeled each folder meticulously. Every document was a thread, every spreadsheet a signal. I uploaded the files into the encrypted drive Noah sent. The status bar moved slow but steady. Outside, the snowfall had stopped, the forest washed in a soft morning haze. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. "These are better than court subpoenas," Noah said. "Your grandfather kept ledgers most CEOs would kill to destroy. Offshore pathways, wire logs, emails with fake identities. If we can link Caleb to these directly, we don't need much more." "He's too careful," I warned. "He doesn't sign anything unless he can deny it." Noah chuckled. "Then we focus on people around him. Vanessa, the assistant who set up the travel, the accountant who slipped. Trust me, there's always someone who talked too much." He was right. I remembered my grandfather saying the most dangerous weakness in a scam wasn't the money trail. It was ego. Somewhere, someone close to Caleb had left a trail wider than intended. Noah and I spent the next few days building a secure, cloud-based timeline. Every transaction, every change of ownership, every asset transfer was mapped. The Cayman-based shell that funneled money into real estate in Nevada. The phony charitable foundation in Florida that washed donor funds into political favors. The connection to Blake Logistics buried under layers of middlemen. One night, while organizing the communications folder, I found a name I hadn't seen in years. Victoria Lane. She had been Vanessa's personal assistant, sharp. Discreet, barely 25 when she worked for the family. Her name appeared in a chain of travel logs for private flights marked as passenger and coordinator. I sent the file to Noah. She might be a crack in the wall. He replied 2 minutes later. "Already on it. If she's bitter, she's useful. If she's scared, she's leverage." It was strange how quickly we became efficient at something that should have felt illegal. But it didn't. This wasn't theft. This wasn't espionage. It was reclamation backed by facts built with patience. Ruth kept her distance during the process, but always seemed to know when I needed a break. She'd leave a meal on the counter or fresh logs by the fire. Sometimes late at night, she'd share pieces of how she and Grandpa had mapped the structure. Quiet strategy meetings in this very cabin years before he died. "Your grandfather trusted people sparingly," she said once. "But when he did, he bet everything. I understood that now. He hadn't just left me a war chest. He left me a battlefield." Noah called again on the 5th day. "We found something." "What?" "There's a side firm under the name Armitage Consulting. They're technically a vendor for Blake Logistics, but their tax ID traces back to an apartment address in Los Angeles." "That's not unusual." "No, but the leaseholder on that apartment is Caleb's college roommate, and the Armitage files include payment receipts signed with Caleb's initials. Sloppy old school scanned, not digital. Probably never meant to be seen. That's a direct link. It gets better. The roommate filed for bankruptcy last year. Claimed the business never generated income, which means if we prove Caleb funneled millions through a non-reporting entity, it's fraud, possibly tax evasion. Do we have enough for the board? Not yet, but we're close. Give me a week, maybe less. I ended the call and sat in silence. The pieces were moving one after another toward the center of the board. Each document, each lie uncovered was a whisper of something bigger. I looked at the wall where I had pinned a printed copy of Grandpa's final message. Make them wish they never laughed. I wasn't smiling, but I could feel the edges of something sharp rising beneath the calm, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I stepped out of the town car onto the circular driveway of the Marlowe Grand Hotel in downtown Seattle. The Blake Logistics insignia lit up in gold behind the valet station, a beacon of corporate vanity. The evening air was crisp, tinged with salt from the harbor a few blocks away. My shoes crunched softly on the stone path as I adjusted my collar and walked through the grand entrance. Inside, the lobby had been transformed into a cathedral of legacy and wealth. Massive banners hung from the ceiling, each with a photograph of Harrison Blake in various stages of empire building. One with him shaking hands with city officials. Another on the floor of the old shipping warehouse in Tacoma. A third, older one showed him playing chess with a young boy. That boy was me. Guests in tuxedos and gowns mingled beneath chandeliers, glasses of champagne. Catching the light like diamonds, a jazz quartet played something slow and expensive in the corner. Waitstaff weaved silently through the crowd with practiced elegance. I saw them before they saw me. Caleb in a dark suit tailored within an inch of its life. Vanessa in emerald green, dripping with jewelry, smiling at some investor's wife like it was part of a scripted scene. Liam stood nearby, holding a drink, wearing a smirk that hadn't changed since high school. The moment my presence registered, something shifted in the room. Not a hush, but a subtle rebalancing. Heads turned, whispers flickered, Caleb's jaw tightened, Vanessa's smile froze mid-sentence. Liam raised his glass in mock salute. I walked past a group of senior board members and into the heart of the party, never breaking eye contact with Caleb. For a man who had once tried to erase me from the family tree, he looked remarkably composed. But his eyes were calculating, Elliot, Vanessa said as I approached, her tone too sweet to be genuine. "This is a surprise." I nodded once. "Didn't want to miss Grandpa's tribute. After all, he meant something to me." Liam chuckled. "Still clinging to the family name, huh?" He took a slow sip of his drink, leaned in. "Or maybe you're still bitter about that scholarship mess." What was it called? Jefferson Scholars. I looked at him. The years had made him taller, broader, richer, but not sharper. I'm not bitter about the scholarship, I said calmly. I'm bitter I let you live that lie for so long without consequences. His smirk faded just a fraction. Vanessa stepped in. We all mourn differently. Some of us move on. Some linger. I ignored her and turned to Caleb. Quite the event you put together. Grandpa would have hated it. Caleb's voice was measured but lower than usual. He always liked your sense of humor. I don't think he was joking when he left me the plane ticket. The silence between us sharpened. Caleb didn't flinch, but something flickered behind his eyes. He knew. Not everything, but enough to know I wasn't here just to sip champagne. So what brings you back? Vanessa asked, tilting her head. Finally tired of grading essays in Oregon, still teaching. Literature now. Your favorite, if I remember right. Vanity and deception. She gave a tight laugh. You always had a flair for melodrama. Liam leaned closer again, voice low. Let me guess. You're hoping to sue us for emotional damage. Maybe find a loophole in the will. While I held his gaze. No. I'm just here to honor a man who built everything you're standing on, and to remind you that sometimes the quiet ones know more than they say. Caleb's posture shifted slightly. A flick of the wrist, an adjustment of his tie. He was unsettled. I scanned the crowd, made eye contact with one of the board members. Alan Prescott. He nodded, barely perceptible, then turned away. That was all I needed. I stayed for another hour, moving from group to group, listening more than speaking. I asked questions that seemed benign but weren't. Who signed the tribute contract? When did the commemorative fund close? Who authorized the portrait series? By the time dessert was served, I had gathered more soft intel than a week of emails could provide. Not everything would hold up in court, but in context it helped shape motive behavior exposure. Near the end of the evening, I stepped outside to the hotel balcony. The city stretched out before me, lights shimmering against the black water. The wind was cold, clean biting. Caleb followed a few minutes later. He stood beside me, silent for a moment. You've changed, he said. I glanced sideways. No, you just stopped looking. He looked down at the street below. You can dig all you want, Elliot, but you won't find what you're looking for. That's where you're wrong. I already did. He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. He straightened his shoulders, forced a smile. Well, enjoy the party. He walked back inside. I stayed a moment longer, letting the cold cut through my jacket. They hadn't crumbled. Not yet, but cracks had formed, and the party, for all its glitz, had already started to feel like a last celebration before the lights went out. Noah called me early the next morning. His voice was calm, but I heard the electricity humming beneath it. We got it. I sat up straight in the armchair by the cabin window, sunlight cutting across the wooden floor in stripes. House Solid Shell Company, registered in Barbados, account routed through a bank in the Cayman Islands. Caleb authorized multiple transfers totaling $6.2 million over the past 18 months. The signatory listed is Harold K. Hayes. That name meant nothing to me. Fake Noah continued. I ran a background check. No tax record, no social profile, no lease, no credit history. That man does not exist. I closed my eyes for a moment. That's the trigger. You ready to pull it? I was already opening the encrypted folder. Inside, under Grandpa's final directives, was a protocol marked Redlock. Ruth had said to wait until we had something undeniable. This was it. I forwarded the full packet to Ruth and added a single sentence. Initiate freeze. Within an hour, Ruth confirmed receipt. She would file the necessary motion through the trustee authority Grandpa had granted her years ago. Once triggered, the assets tied to the account would be flagged under suspicion of fraud. By the time Blake Logistics noticed, their internal gears would already be locked. The waiting was unbearable. So I walked through the forest to clear my head. The snow had begun to melt patches of earth pushing through along the trail. I thought of Dad, how he used to say that spring came slow in the Northwest, but always came with a purpose. By dusk, Ruth messaged me. Done. Account frozen. Cayman notified. Notification sent to Blake Logistics Board via encrypted channel per your grandfather's protocol. I read the line 3 times. Game on. Noah messaged 30 minutes later. Heads up. Something's already happening. What do you mean just got a ping from one of my friends in compliance? They flagged a suspicious card lock event tied to Blake family accounts. High-level freeze. No notification issued. Someone just got caught mid-swipe. I smiled. Liam. It didn't take long for confirmation. Vanessa's social media feed had gone suspiciously dark. Caleb's calendar, once full of speaking engagements and advisory board photos, was now oddly empty. That night, I sat by the fire, laptop open, tracking the fallout. Noah built a chart. Ruth compiled board-level reports. We kept our movements clean and anonymous. Everything pointed to irregular activity with enough documentation to make silence an act of complicity. Then the call came. It was Liam. His voice cracked sharp with panic. Dad, my card didn't work. I was at Mercedes trying to close on the G-Class lease and it got denied. I could picture him standing in that showroom trying to play it off like a glitch while texting his father with trembling fingers. Caleb's voice was faint in the background, confused and increasingly agitated. That doesn't make sense. I paid that off last week. Well, something's wrong. The manager looked at me like I'm a fraud. I heard Caleb curse softly, then the call cut. I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. It was the first fracture. The next morning, Ruth confirmed receipt of the board's reply. They acknowledged the anomaly. A hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Internal, confidential, but enough. I wouldn't be there. Not in person. Not yet. My name wouldn't appear on the documents. The source of the materials was classified under protective privilege. But I would watch, and I would wait. Behind every powerful man who thinks he built his empire with invincibility is a file folder full of secrets. Caleb had never imagined that his would be read aloud in a boardroom he used to control. I opened the file again and added one more line to my grandfather's note. Ruth moved fast. Within 48 hours, she secured a confidential meeting with the Blake Logistics Board and the named beneficiaries of Harrison Blake's estate. The invitation came from the trust office, marked priority with a neutral location, a private legal suite on the top floor of the Forsyth Tower in downtown Seattle. I arrived early, dressed in the same quiet gray suit I wore at the will reading. It fit better now, not just in size but in presence. I belonged in this room even if half the people inside would rather see me gone. The board members filed in first, cautious but curious. Most of them had received Ruth's preliminary notice the day before, flagging the hidden financial discrepancies and initiating a temporary freeze on discretionary accounts. The air was tense but polite. Then came the family. Caleb entered with heavy steps, his face a tight mask of control. Vanessa trailed him, visibly irritated, her heels striking the floor like gavel hits. Liam slouched behind them, eyes darting, jaw clenched. Margaret didn't show. Ruth stood at the head of the table, calm, professional, neutral. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I understand tensions are high. Today's meeting is to address new information regarding the late Harrison Blake's estate and directives. Caleb leaned forward. We already had the will reading. It was legally binding. Ruth didn't blink. What was shared previously was only part of the estate documentation. Mr. Blake, prior to his passing, created an alternate testament protected under conditional execution. That condition has now been fulfilled. Vanessa scoffed. Are we seriously entertaining the idea that he hid another will? That sounds like manipulation. Ruth nodded slightly and opened a file folder. Contained in this document is a secondary directive from Mr. Blake, specifying that if his grandson Elliot Foster could pass a test of ethical integrity defined by a private series of tasks, he would be recognized as the intended successor to the controlling interest in Blake Logistics. Caleb's voice spiked. This is fraudulent. I want a handwriting analysis, a date stamp audit. There's no way my father would bypass me. Ruth remained unmoved. Included in this packet is a notarized video recording made 3 months before Mr. Blake's death. The file is verified, time-stamped, and sealed with biometric authentication. She connected a laptop to the screen and played the video. There, clear and composed Harrison Blake looked into the lens. If you're watching this, it means Elliot did what none of you thought he would. He chose restraint. He chose principle over greed. Caleb, if you're here, you know why. You made me doubt you years ago, and I never forgot. The room was still. Liam looked stunned. Vanessa turned pale. Caleb sat frozen. Ruth turned off the screen and lifted a second document. Additionally, Mr. Blake repurchased Caleb's shares through a blind trust over the past 2 years. He did so legally, quietly, and with majority board approval. As of last quarter, Mr. Elliot Foster is the largest individual shareholder in Blake Logistics. That's impossible, Caleb hissed. The documents are here. The trust transfer has already been notarized. The state has the filings. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The board members whispered to each other, eyes flicking between me and Ruth and the pile of papers growing on the table. Caleb stood abruptly. This is a setup, a damn theatrical play. One of the board members cleared his throat. It's legal, and if this is all accurate, we have an obligation to respond accordingly. The room descended into argument. Voices rising, papers passed around, phones buzzing. Caleb tried to reassert control. Vanessa questioned the legality. Liam demanded to know if he'd be cut off, but I remained still. Harrison had played the long game, not just with trusts and shares, but with loyalty, with trust. And now his voice echoed louder than anyone else's. The meeting ended without resolution. No decisions made, just shock and silence. But the balance had shifted, and they all knew it. Within days of the boardroom reveal, Noah submitted the full dossier to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the IRS. He filed it anonymously through a protected whistleblower channel, attaching Ruth's authorization in the chain of verified documentation. By the end of the week, Caleb's name was flagged across 4 federal databases. His personal and business accounts were frozen under a pending investigation order. Blake Logistics issued an internal memo acknowledging the freeze and suspending all discretionary privileges tied to the Blake family accounts. I watched it unfold from the cabin. News trickled in through encrypted messages and legal bulletins. Ruth kept me updated without emotion, only facts. Noah was more animated, relaying headlines as they broke. Fraud allegations rock Blake empire. CEO under tax evasion probe. Caleb appeared once for the press outside his gated estate, a stiff denial written across his face. He looked 10 years older. The same reporters who once flattered his every move now dissected each word. The investigation expanded. Vanessa was pulled in for questioning regarding brand sponsorship funds that had quietly flowed through shell companies now linked to Caleb's frozen network. Her legal team scrambled. Liam and Isabel were formally removed from the pending shareholder list. Their names were struck from the upcoming board proxy vote. Without active shares, their influence evaporated. I didn't gloat. There was no victory lap, just confirmation. I remembered Harrison's words spoken to me the night I turned down a job at a private college to keep teaching public school. If you do things right, the people who counted you out will fall apart on their own. This family will collapse from within if it loses its compass. I had thought he was being dramatic. Now I saw he was being precise. Caleb's empire wasn't collapsing because I pushed it. It was collapsing because he had built it on a hollow foundation. No accountability, no ethics, no anchor. Ruth called to confirm the next board meeting would proceed without Caleb. The interim CEO would be selected by the remaining members, but Caleb's voting rights were officially suspended, pending investigation. Vanessa made one last effort to rally support, hosting a desperate luncheon with remaining allies. Only 3 people showed up. One of them left after 10 minutes. Social media turned, public sentiment shifted, comment sections overflowed with criticism, speculation, and recycled photos of the Blake family's once glamorous life. The silence from their estate became more telling than any press release. They had no script for this. I remained invisible. Not a single photo of me had surfaced. My name was never attached to the filings. Ruth and Noah shielded every move. But I was there behind each turning gear, not to destroy, to correct. And as the dust settled around Caleb's name, I realized this wasn't the end. It was only the reckoning. I handed back the envelope with my signature on the interim agreement. Ruth raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The next board meeting was already scheduled. They assumed I would take the helm permanently, but I had no intention of staying in that chair. When the day came, I stood at the head of the table not as a claimant, but as a messenger. The boardroom was packed. Members, advisors, executives, all watching me. I started simply. This company needs someone better than me to run it, someone who understands modern logistics, global trade, and tech integration. But more than that, someone who leads with principle. There were murmurs, confused glances. I'm not declining because I doubt myself. I'm stepping aside because I believe in legacy. Not just the name Blake, but what we choose to make of it from here. I turned to Ruth, who gave a small nod, then tapped a file in front of her. This is Elena Marquez. Some of you may know her name, former VP of Operations at Pacific Ocean Freight. She restructured failing ports in Chile, expanded green logistics in Mexico, and navigated complex trade reforms in Panama. Ruth handed copies of Elena's credentials down the line. Her story did the rest. She wasn't a Blake. She wasn't even part of the usual circles. But she was brilliant, principled, and ready. I stepped back. Let her lead. I'll be stepping down fully at the end of the transition period. No one objected. A few applauded. One older board member even whispered, finally. I walked out lighter than I had in years. Later that week, I finalized the paperwork in regard to open the Richard Foster Memorial Scholarship Fund. It would serve low-income students pursuing degrees in law, public service, or education. The first funding came directly from my grandfather's personal accounts, as stipulated in the alternate will. Harrison had set aside a trust for whatever path I chose. I chose teaching. My old school in Eugene welcomed me back with open arms. I declined the department head position and asked for a full teaching load instead. Literature, ethics, history. One morning I met Ruth for coffee in a quiet diner off the main road. She stirred her tea slowly, then smiled. He knew you wouldn't keep the power. That's why he gave it to you first, to see if you'd give it away. I didn't need to answer. Instead, I looked out the window at the ordinary world. Trucks passing, people walking dogs, a teenager skateboarding past a stop sign. The world didn't know the storm that had passed, but I did. And in that stillness, I finally understood what justice looked like when it wasn't loud. It looked like peace. I drove until the highway turned coastal, until the trees parted and the Pacific opened up beside me. Oregon's shoreline always had a certain weight to it. Gray skies, crashing waves, not the postcard kind of beautiful, but something real, something earned. I parked near the overlook where my father once took me as a kid, back when life felt smaller but heavier somehow. I walked down the rocky path until my shoes hit sand, then kept going until the tide licked at my ankles. There I stopped. They used to say we were the forgotten ones in the family, the quiet ones, the ones who stayed out of the spotlight. But we remembered everything. The sideways glances, the jokes, the closed doors. We were raised in the same house. But I learned something they never did. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive. I thought of the envelope again, that day at the will reading when they laughed and I unfolded a single crumpled ticket. 6 words. Make them wish they never laughed. I did. Not with rage, not with fire, with patience, with purpose. The wind was cold, but I didn't flinch. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the sea replace the noise of the last few months. They would rebuild maybe, try to clean up their names, spin new stories. That was their choice, but they would do it knowing someone had drawn a line. That silence wasn't weakness. That being overlooked didn't mean being outplayed. Behind me, a gull cried out. A wave crashed closer, and I smiled, because I had nothing left to prove. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or laughed at, let your growth be your answer. Let your success be your slants breaker. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes justice is 6 words delivered in your own time. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful journeys like this. Your voice matters here. Let's keep telling stories that speak truth in quiet ways.